In the Canadian Senate, King Charles III presented the Carney government's speech from the throne, emphasizing support for the CBC and action on climate change, among other priorities.
A tweet from Governor General Mary Simon's account referred to King Charles III's Ottawa visit as deepening the bond between our nations, implying he was a foreign monarch rather than Canada's sovereign.
A report by Canada's RCMP urgently seeks federal funding due to a nearly fivefold increase in terrorism threats in the past year. Hello Canada, it's Wednesday, May 28th, and this is the True North Daily Brief. I'm Cosmin, Dzsurdzsa.
And I'm Noah Jarvis.
We've got you covered with all the news you need to know. Let's discuss the top stories of the day and the True North exclusives you won't hear anywhere else. His Majesty King Charles III delivered the speech from the throne in the Senate of Canada, pledging that the Carney government would uphold the CBC and tackle climate change, among other priorities. The speech began with a land acknowledgement to the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people and expressed the need to work towards truth and reconciliation.
I would like to acknowledge that we are gathered on the unceded territory of the Algonquin and the Anishinaabe people. This land acknowledgement is a recognition of shared history as a nation, while continuing to deepen my own understanding. It is my great hope that in each of your communities and collectively as a country, a path is found toward truth and reconciliation in both word and deed.
The speech represented the third time in all of Canadian history, and the first time since 1977 that Canada's sovereign delivered the throne speech. The speech, written by Carney's advisors, presented a sweeping overview of global instability, climate policy, and multiculturalism. Additionally, the King highlighted multiculturalism and how Canada has accepted refugees, quote, from some of the most tragic global conflict zones. On the CBC, King Charles stated that the Carney government was, quote, determined to protect the institutions that bring these cultures and this identity to the world, like CBC and Radio Canada. The King talked about a changing world with threats to global stability and the need to create a new Canadian economy and strengthen partnerships with like-minded countries, as Carney had repeated on the campaign trail. The King also touted the Carney government's promise to cut the income tax for the lowest quintile by 1%, eliminate the GST for first-time home buyers for homes under $1 million, and eliminate all federal interprovincial trade barriers before Canada Day. The speech also claimed that the Carney government would establish a new federal department dedicated to achieving the goal of, quote, one project, one review, and reducing the average time to approve major infrastructure projects from 5 years to 2. The King repeated Carney's promise to double the rate of home construction, driving this acceleration through a new government department called Build Canada Homes. Notably, the King did not mention U.S. President Donald Trump's 51st state comments, tariffs from the United States, or the need to decouple Canadian economic and defense policy from America. However, the speech did include a promise to introduce legislation to strengthen security at Canada's southern border. So Noah, before I pass it off to you, there were a couple things that stood out to me, particularly the land acknowledgement stuff, the focus on what you could call diversity, equity, inclusion topics, the mention of climate change, which seems to still be a priority for the Liberals, despite Mark Carney's posturing about lowering the consumer carbon tax to $0. To me, this entire thing sort of seemed like a convenient rehashing or parade of Canada's historical ties to the monarchy, to the United Kingdom, our historical parent nation, and not a real expression of Canadian patriotism and national identity. Because throughout the speech, there's very little discussion about what actually makes a Canadian. Now, of course, the King mentioned Canada's Francophone identity, which is one part of that equation. But Canadian identity came across to me in this speech as simply support for the CBC, vague notions of diversity and kindness, the sort of deference to government that the liberals expect from everybody else. Noah, what was your take? How do you think Canadians at large responded to the throne speech? And were there elements of politicization by Carney's team to use this speech to go after Trump?
Well, I think it's pretty clear that Mark Carney and his advisors had advised the king to come and deliver the throne speech to sort of shield their government's policy agenda from any serious criticism and scrutiny. I think Mark Carney is aware that conservatives generally are supportive of the monarchy. They're generally more supportive than liberal supporters of the monarchy. And to this extent, they are probably under the assumption that conservatives are not going to criticize the throne speech with nearly as much aggression as they would if, say, Governor General Mary Simon was delivering the throne speech, who was appointed by Justin Trudeau after his other failed appointment, Julie Payette, revealed herself to be quite a demanding and even abusive person. However, this throne speech really contains some content that conservatives might appreciate. However, I think a lot of conservatives are in a bit of a sit and wait sort of mood. They got to see whether or not the Carney government is actually serious in bringing down home prices. We had some conflicting comments that the housing minister, Gregor Robertson, had made, where he said that his goal is to not bring down home prices, but instead to build more affordable homes, basically government built and government subsidized homes. And we've heard Mark Carney say other things on the housing file. We've heard Mark Carney say that he's going to dedicate more funding toward the Canadian Armed Forces in reaching the 2% of GDP target that NATO had set out, and generally trying to rebuild our decimated armed forces after years upon years of neglect. But it remains to be seen whether or not he's serious on this type of issues. I know that Canadian Taxpayers Federation President Franco Terrazzano had said that he is happy to see the Liberal government try to cut the income tax for the lowest quintile by 1% and to eliminate the GST for first-time home buyers for homes under 1 million. But Canadians need further tax relief, and whether or not this Liberal government would be dedicated to providing that sort of tax relief to Canadians and to make Canada a tax competitive country, it remains to be seen. So I think a lot of Liberals who voted for Mark Carney, they got what they wanted. A lot of conservatives, they have to see whether or not Carney is serious in addressing the major issues of this country. And to a large extent, this is just an extension of what Mark Carney had been campaigning on, platitudes and ripping certain policies from the conservatives in order to build a coalition of liberal supporters that even Prime Minister Justin Trudeau had not been able to achieve. So I think it's very much a remain and see type of time. However, Canadians should not be blinded to what the Carney government is pursuing by the pageantry of King Charles III being here. It's the kind of thing most Canadians learn in elementary school civics classes. The king isn't just a royal guest, he's our head of state. But someone at Rideau Hall may have missed that lesson. A tweet from Governor General Mary Simon's official account on Monday referred to King Charles III's visit to Ottawa as a deepening of the bond between our nations, implying that the king was visiting as a foreign monarch from the United Kingdom rather than as the sovereign of Canada. The tweet read, quote, Simon was honored to have an audience with His Majesty King Charles III at Rideau Hall as part of their Majesty's royal visit to Canada. These ongoing conversations reflect the meaningful bond between our nations, followed by a Canadian and British emoji side by side. Although King Charles III wears many crowns as monarch of multiple Commonwealth realms, each title is legally distinct. In Canadian law, he is King of Canada, a position enshrined in Canada's Constitution Act. He serves as Canada's sovereign independently of his UK role. The Governor General acts on the King's behalf within Canada, but the King himself remains the country's constitutional head of state. That means this isn't a meeting between two nations, it's the monarch visiting his own. How did the people working at Rideau Hall make such an erroneous mistake? Did the Governor General eventually apologize for the error?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. You would assume people at Rideau Hall are educated in Canada's constitutional monarchy and the way our government is set up, and who, in fact, is the head of state, that being the king. But no, they didn't apologize. They simply just scrubbed the tweet off of their X account and essentially issued a new one that didn't have the mistake. It was a little bit shorter. I'll read it right now. And it says Governor General Simon was honored to have an audience with His Majesty King Charles III at Rideau Hall as part of their Majesty's royal visit to Canada. So a lot of people took issue with this tweet, not only because of the misunderstanding of Governor General Mary Simon's role and what part the monarchy plays in Canada's civic structure, but also sort of equating the Governor General to the stature of the king, almost as if they are equal, by the Governor General inviting him as a guest, essentially, the way the tweet was portrayed into Canada, when in reality, based on our Constitution, Canada is already the king's dominion. So it just shows and betrays a lack of basic education in civics, whether it was just a flippant mistake or not. You would expect that people whose literal job is to represent the king and the royal crown would know better. Canada's RCMP urgently requests federal funding, citing a nearly fivefold increase in terrorism threats in the past year. They warn of insufficient resources to combat the growing danger, especially youth radicalization fueled by, quote, online extremism. In a newly released ministerial briefing binder, the RCMP revealed that between April 1st, 2023 and March 31st, 2024, 25 suspects were charged with 83 terrorism-related offenses, marking a 488% increase over the previous year. The force said 3 minors and 6 young adults were among those charged, and another 8 youths were subject to terrorism peace bonds. The document, prepared in December 2024 for former Public Safety Minister David McGuinty, now in the hands of Prime Minister Mark Carney's newly appointed Minister Gary Ananda Sanjari, outlines severe gaps in national security readiness. It notes that 6 terrorist plots were foiled over the past year, with arrests in Edmonton, Ottawa, and Toronto. The spike in charges comes amid increasing concern from the United States about the flow of fentanyl and suspected terrorists coming across the northern border into the U.S. FBI Director Kash Patel recently said, quote, "Canada is our partner in the north who has to get stepping." Patel claimed 85% of suspected terrorists are now entering the U.S. through the Canadian border. Between 2022 and 2024, 1,199 individuals on the terrorist watch list were intercepted at the northern border, compared to just 205 at the southern border of the U.S. In 2024, 741 pounds of fentanyl were seized at the northern border, enough to kill over 168 million people. The RCMP report identifies foreign interference, border integrity, hate crimes, and opioids as additional hot issues, but warns that the ongoing budget constraints are forcing it to shift resources reactively, often at the cost of broader preparedness. Obviously, there are several elements to this problem, because the issue of terrorism has wide sweeping effects, not only on our relationship with our major partner, the United States, border security, public safety, but also it interplays with some of the global conflicts we're seeing play out. And those conflicts are arriving here on Canadian streets. And people who are beholden to extremist views or particular factions in these global conflicts come to this country and bring those conflicts on the streets, and even go so far as expressing support for listed terrorist entities. Noah, have we seen this play out in the last year or so, in particular with the conflict in the Middle East on Canadian streets?
Absolutely. It seems as if since the October 7th, 2023 terrorist attack by Hamas against Israel, and where 1,200 civilians were murdered, it seems as if the Islamist world has been very agitated and been ready to commit certain terrorist attacks against civilians. We've seen recently with the terrorist attack in Washington, where two Israeli staffers were gunned down in cold blood by a Hamas supporting lunatic who committed these murders based on political motives. It is a terrorist act, and we've seen other countries in Europe and are just around the world who have been reeling from an increase in terrorist activity. And Canada is no different. We've had the police arrest multiple, wannabe terrorists who were about to commit a terrorist offense in Toronto or in other big cities, and they were arrested at the last minute. Thank God that these perpetrators weren't able to commit their heinous acts. But at the end of the day, this is still a challenge that the RCMP is facing, hence why they're asking for increased funding. And we have to really reflect on what sort of incentives Canada has been giving to terrorists, to the point where terrorists who are entering the United States are coming in through the northern border rather than the southern border, the porous southern border that cartels, drug cartels use to traffic drugs and other humans, or whose illegal immigrants just try to get over. It is the northern border that are actually crossing, and that is likely because Canada has a very tolerant and liberal system when it comes to people who are entering our country and who are even trying to immigrate here. We recently had the case of a person who was trying to go and join a Yemeni terrorist organization, an undisclosed Yemeni terrorist organization, but I think we can assume it was the Houthis. This person was weeks away from gaining Canadian citizenship, had been in this country for several years, had attended several pro-Palestine, even pro-Hamas rallies where he was photographed wearing the Yemeni flag. It is not as if this person wasn't giving off the signs that this person wanted to be a part of a terrorist organization, and yet we were unable to deal with this person until they were weeks away from gaining citizenship, and they were really on the cusp of going to Yemen to join the Houthis. Our immigration system and just the vetting of the people that we do for the people that are coming into this country is very lax. It is not to the standards that it ought to be in. And God forbid that we get to the situation where we are actually dealing with a terrorist attack from an Islamist who is frustrated about what is going on in Israel and Gaza. And we have an atrocity similar to the one that happened in Washington. And this is not only a threat coming from Islamist terrorists, but also comes from people who sympathize with the Khalistan cause of the Punjab region of India separating away from Canada. That conflict has nothing to do with Canada whatsoever, but Canada has been importing a bunch of people from India, specifically the Punjab region, who are sympathetic to the Khalistani cause, far more sympathetic than the people who are actually living in the Punjab region of that area, just separating away from India, and they would be willing to use violent methods in order to see their goal achieved. They would be willing to commit to terrorist violence. We've seen the 1985 Air India bombing, and we don't want a repeat of that sort of bombing or any other terrorist attack on Canadian soil because of a Khalistani extremist. So Canada definitely has a lot of hard work to do in order to make our country next to terrorist free. And I hope that this Carney government takes the opportunity to engage in this sort of work, because the Trudeau government was totally uninterested in dealing with this problem because of their ideological and obscene commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and to including minorities, no matter where they come from and no matter what their ideological background is, into the fabric of Canadian society.
That's it for today, folks. Thanks for tuning in. You can stay on top of new episodes every weekday by subscribing to the Daily Brief on iTunes and Spotify. Also, while you're at it, make sure to hit us with a 5-star rating and please leave a review.